Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with Jeffrey Todhunter, our Director of Costume Production. Jeffrey, hello. Thank you for being a part of Costume Parade.
I am thrilled to be here.
You did a phenomenal job curating these selections and walking people through the process it takes to make a costume, which I would love your firsthand account, but a lot of folks think that these costumes are just like sitting on a shelf or we go to a big room and pull them out. It's not that easy, is it?
No, not at all. I would say that a lot of people that I come in contact with will come, maybe people who tour ASF and they come in the costume department, and or people I meet in public, and I'll tell them what I do, and they'll say, "Well, where do you get the costumes from?" And I was like, "Well, we make the costumes at ASF. We have a group of craftspeople and artisans that create the costumes, and the majority of the costumes that are on the ASF stages are created here at ASF in our shops." And so I think that's something a lot of people just don't realize until they ask and you explain that to them.
For Costume Parade, which is an exhibition we have on our grounds right now, we actually take folks through in an amazing outline of the number of hands that touch a costume before it even gets to the actor. Tell us just a little bit about just very quickly that process, Jeffrey.
Yeah, the costume process starts with the costume designer. That costume designer interacts with the director of the play, and they determine a direction that they want to go as far as the period, the look, the style of the costumes for the piece. And so once those costumes are designed by the designer and approved by the director, then they come to me as the director of costume production, and I will work with the designer to understand the vision that they're going for and where they want this to go and how they want this to look. And then I will take those designs that I'm given, those will go to my draper and cutter, and they'll create the patterns for the costumes. They'll fit the actors. Those are then handed over to their first hand, which is their assistant, who will cut the costumes and do any adjustments to patterns, and will assist them in fittings. Those cut costume pieces will then go to stitchers. They will be instructed by those first hands in the process to complete the costume, as well as stitchers who take those costume pieces and sew them together and finish them. There's also other people in the shop working as well on other elements. So other costume elements that might not be clothing per se, accessories, hats, footwear, jewelry, those are handled by costume crafts artisans. That's a whole other area that does very specific items for each look. There's also a wig department that's also creating wigs, making wigs from scratch or styling existing wigs, preparing those for the actors. So all of these different elements are involved in completing the final look that the audience sees on the stage.
I would say costumes is one of the top design areas as I go about my life around not only Montgomery, but around the country, that ASF is known for its costumes.
True.
And the team you've put together, like these are folks who have specialized in a certain area. They've developed a craft that they're contributing to this moment that the actor is ultimately going to wear, which is an expression of character, story, time period. Um, it's a very collaborative process that we see ultimately unfold literally on the actor.
It's very true. It's very true. That's the thing is, and in working with the actors during costume fittings, we often, we get some input from them too, and the designer will be there with us, and anything that we can do on our end to support where the performance is going with the actors and with the director. We try to be really flexible in order to continue to collaborate through the process.
Well, let's take a look at some of these costumes that you curated for this special exhibition that we did. Midsummer Night's Dream, I'm going to jump in there, one of Shakespeare's most produced plays. Many people read it in school, so they're familiar with it. Uh, Tell us a little bit about this one. I know this one used a lot of dyeing of fabrics,
Mhm.
painting by hand. What's that like?
Yeah, our production of Midsummer Night's Dream was the look of the show was a very classic look. The era of the present day setting for the humans in the play was like Edwardian, was very early 20th century. And those things look pretty traditional for the human characters. But when we got into the fairy world, the fairies were very sort of neoclassical looking and very gossamer, flowy, delicate fabrics, just kind of what you expect the fairy to look like. And so all of the fabrics for the fairy costumes were all delicate silk fabrics that were all hand dyed in various techniques by our costume crafts department. And then many of the costumes were hand beaded and finished with details, hand painted details as well. So it was a really lovely process to see. We actually did quite a lot of specialty dyeing techniques and beading that we often don't get a chance to do. So that was a pretty fulfilling project.
Well, on to another project that when you talk about classic looks and legendary, Mary Poppins, I mean, you're talking about some legendary looks, colors, and silhouettes here.
Very
How
true.
does the designer tackle something so well known?
Well, I'll tell you, for a costume designer, and that show was designed by Brenda Vanderwill, who also designed A Midsummer Night's Dream. And it is very intimidating to take on a piece that is a story that's so well known. And visually, these characters, the look of the characters are so well known from Walt Disney's very popular and famous 1960s motion picture. So you want to bring something new to it, but you don't want to stray too far because there's a certain familiarity that your audience kind of expects, and you don't want to disappoint them. So you find a place where you can bring those silhouettes and those looks to your characters, and people will get what they hope to see, but also bring something of your own ideas to it. So, and there's other elements in Mary Poppins, very specific characters like Mary and Bert that you really want to know who those folks are and you're familiar with them. But there's lots of other characters in the show for the stage production that are not necessarily represented in the film that you can be really creative with too. So it really gives you a whole lot of options, but you do want to stay true to certain things.
So, a project that I know was near and dear to you that you designed was Ain't Misbehavin'. And these costumes, in a musical review, the costumes have to do a lot. So, talk about the challenges and the opportunities for designing costumes in a music review.
Yes, I love doing musical reviews. I've done quite a number of them during my career, and this is actually one of my favorite shows. The production at ASF that I did, it's the only production of Make Misbehaving that I've done, and I'd always wanted to do it. So I was really excited to have the opportunity. Um, Kind of wonderful. There's only 5 performers in Ain't Misbehaving, and they have a look for the first act and a look for the second act. The nice thing about 5 performers, only 10 costumes in a musical, because if we're doing a typical story musical, there will be hundreds of costumes. So it's wonderful to do a show with 5 people, 10 costumes, because the amount of detail you really get to spend more time with each costume. That's pretty exciting. The look for Ain't Misbehaving it's all fabulous music from the 20s and 30s written by Fats Waller. And the mood of the show is generally quite exciting, very joyful, and just a whole lot of fun. And the performers in the show are always having a great time. There's a few poignant moments in the show, but for the most part, it's very, very upbeat. And so the first act was very vivid, very colorful in clothes that sort of evoked the 1930s. And then Act Two became a slightly more elegant feel, at least at the top of Act Two. And so the clothes got a little more elegant, a little more out on the town kind of looking for the actors. So it was loads of fun. I had a blast. I had an incredible cast, a fabulous director, and it was quite a lot of fun. There was a lot of sparkle and shine, and I enjoy that.
You talking about just the sheer number of costumes. I think this kind of goes over people's heads when you think about a musical like The Sound of Music. They think, oh, it's just some nuns and some, army people, some Nazis, and it's simple. And you go, no, no, let's count the number of times those children change costumes.
Yeah, The
And
Sound of Music, which we did a few years ago, which we did not represent in the costume parade, but it had, we did count numbers because there were so many large amounts of things that you don't really realize until you do count. But there were like 140 pairs of shoes in the show. Just that alone was kind of mind blowing.
Well, another show in Costume Parade is King Lear, which looking at Pamela Schofield's sketches, like I would love to see that full portfolio because her sketches are just amazing. So tell us a little bit about the detail work in making a costume. When is it needed and how much, you alluded to this, how much does that actor play in that detailing of those costumes?
Mhm. Sometimes the actors can be very involved in that. It depends on the project. It depends on the actor. It depends on the designer. Um, the designers I've worked with typically are very in tune, and I try to be as well, very in tune with the needs of the actor based on what they're going to be doing. And we try to be very open to making adjustments for that. The costumes for King Lear were the show was very sort of early Middle Ages, almost Iron Age sort of feeling, very heavy, extremely textural. There were even elements of Middle Eastern costume and Mediterranean elements in there, although it looked very European and very medieval. There was lots and lots of detail and layers. All the costumes were heavily layered and heavily textured costumes, heavy leather elements, heavy metal headdresses, lots of metal detail, lots of metal elements and dangly metal bits and heavy braided coarse fabrics. It was a really beautiful production and had some of the most interesting sort of layers of fabulously interesting elements to it. It was a whole lot of it was a really large production. There were lots and lots of costumes, but it was a whole lot of fun to put together.
Another show from our recent history is All Is Calm, and Val Winkleman designed these costumes. So another challenge in this show that all the men are they come from different countries and different ranks and of various ages. How did you put all that together?
Yeah, Val Winkleman, our costume designer for All Is Calm, did a really lovely job creating an overall look for that. In this musical of music from the early 20th century mostly, is set at a time during World War I when during the battle at Christmas, there was a ceasefire and the soldiers fighting each other took the night off basically took Christmas off and interacted with each other in a very humane, lovely way. And that's what this show represents. The costumes for these actors, these 10 actors, represented various factions that were in World War I that were fighting. So sometimes an actor might represent a German, and sometimes that actor may represent an English soldier. So they had to be in things that would sort of carry through that were not absolutely specific, but would suggest the different ranks or the different countries that they were from. And Val really found a really great place where she just made that work. It was pretty challenging, I think, but she just found just the right place and just the right elements that spoke to that need.
Yeah, she helped the audience could move seamlessly as those men played different characters. The
Mhm.
audience was able to make that leap with them.
Oh, yes.
So let's move to Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Again, one of the most famous plays in the American canon. Teresa Ham did these costumes, and she she talked a lot about the choice to use color or not to use
Mhm.
color in order to convey meaning. So tell folks how important the choices of patterns and colors play in a designer's toolbox.
Absolutely. Well, it had been determined between Teresa and the director that he wanted an overall neutral, sort of sepia toned, old photograph sort of tone to the show most of the time. Um, the play is it's sort of a memory play, and it's set in the early 20th century in the Northeast United States. It's a very sort of homey, wholesome, and a classic story. And so the whole cast was all dressed in clothing that was evocative of the era, but everything was kind of in shades of tans, browns, sepia tone, like an old photograph, except for moments in the later part of the play where Emily, who passed away, is kind of comes back in her mind and is visiting her past. And in her memory, there's some color there. So she has vivid memories of her past. And the designer put in elements of color in characters throughout those scenes where she's remembering her childhood or remembering her early adult years. So it made a strong statement, and it was certainly a huge contrast from what you'd seen previously up until that point in the show where everything was fairly neutral.
Another show we did recently was Ruby, the story of Ruby Bridges, and it's set at a very specific moment in time. And it is amazing how a garment can instantly take you to a moment in history. And this is not far off history from here in America. Tell us about how costume designers approach time periods that may be well known to people.
Well, definitely, this story, which was well known, it's an era that's well known. Um, and Ruby Bridges was a real person with a real story from the early 1960s. And so the designer, Ramona Ward, used for her research lots of photographs of the era, of the actual people that were involved in these situations, actual pictures of Ruby and her teachers, the character in the play, and her family. And those were used really as strong references to find the right elements for all the characters in the play. The large group of the actors in the play, the ensemble of the play, played multiple roles throughout. So they had to be dressed in things that could transition or add elements to create the different characters to tell the story. And then Ruby herself, the young actress who played Ruby, very rarely, if ever, left the stage, and she had to transition as well over different periods of time and different locations and different situations. So there was a whole lot of really figuring out how does that work? What can we get on and off of her very quickly when maybe nobody notices, or maybe we could get her off stage for a second. So there were those elements as well, and it really flowed beautifully, and all of those things just kind of fell into place. It really worked well.
Well, let's talk about Peter Pan. This is so playful and so fun. The designer, which was Patrick Holt, did this. He talked in his description of this project that he had to compromise very little. So tell us about how this collaboration went, and what are the give and takes that go into making a costume?
Yes. Well, Patrick did this show for us, and at the time that the shop built the show, it was there was a lot of time to work on the show, and the design was done really early, and it came into the costume shop really early, which is why Patrick had very little limitations, because there was just available time and money as well. The budget for the show was quite generous. So the shop had lots of time to do these highly detailed, very intricate costumes. Peter Pan, a classic story, very famous musical from the 1950s from Broadway. It's been done numerous times. This production was a lovely production, great ensemble, great principal cast, but all of the fun characters, Captain Hook and Smee, and there were mermaids and Peter, and all these great characters with really wonderfully intricate, interesting clothes. And we had a blast putting that one together, and we actually remounted that show a few years after the original production. So it's this production that's represented in Costume Parade has been on our stages 2 times, and it's just a lot of fun. But yeah, we really had very little limitations on this one, which is very rare. But it was fun to get that. You get that every now and then. That's cool.
Yeah, I always tell folks time is the most important thing you can give artists,
Mhm.
is time.
It's true.
Well, let's talk about a play that's rarely done in Shakespeare's canon, Henry VIII. The costumes in this had to not only convey a time period, but they had to be functional for the actor, which these are not pieces actors wear every day.
Right.
So what's it like working with actors on costumes like of this magnitude?
Yeah, and magnitude is a good word for it. I mean, Henry VIII is a Shakespeare historical piece. It's very rarely done. Most people, I would say, oh, Shakespeare wrote Henry VIII, and yeah, there is a Henry VIII Shakespeare play. This was a contemporary translation as far as the language of the play. So the play had the look of a Tudor era piece, in heavy Tudor era costumes, with this modern sensibility in the language. So that was definitely consideration in the way the actors worked on stage as well, because although they were in heavy Tudor costumes, they weren't necessarily functioning like Tudor individuals all the time because of this juxtaposition of the modern language of the Shakespeare play and the period look of the show. It was a really lovely production, but they were heavy Tudor costumes, lots of layers again, lots of fur, and bulky things on both men and women that they're not accustomed to working with. So women in particular had to work in rehearsal in corsets and heavy petticoats and farthingales because it was a very different thing. The dress, Anne Boleyn's dress, which is on display in our costume parade, is incredibly huge and incredibly heavy. When I was putting it on display, I'd forgotten how incredibly heavy it was. It was a bit of a chore to sort of lug it up onto the display and get it on a mannequin because it's like kind of crazy heavy.
Yeah, and the actor has to carry that weight, act, move quickly, make it look seamless, breathe. It's a lot to manage.
It is.
So the first play that was on the stage when I moved to Montgomery was The Glass Menagerie. I love this play, and this costume that we have on display is an iconic moment in American theater. This dress is wonderful up close. Tell us a little bit about the care and the maintenance of garments during a run and then after the run too.
Yes, this costume, Amanda's cotillion dress that she wears during the show, she's pulled out of the closet. It's a dress from her youth. And the idea is that this dress is old. It's very dear to her because it reminds her of some really important times in her life. And the look of the dress is it's very delicate. The production was done in ASF's Octagon Theater, so the audience is sitting just feet away from the actor. So the dress itself, which needed to look very delicate and frail, is fairly delicate and somewhat frail, but sturdy enough to maintain a performances, a run. But this was another costume that was hand painted, hand dyed, lots and lots of time in distressing and dyeing the fabrics. All the fabrics were a light neutral color. They were every single piece of fabric in the costume was custom dyed and painted. Some elements painted before the costume was assembled, and then more painting after the costume was assembled. But with something that delicate, it's very important that number one, everybody who handles the costume, the actor as well as the wardrobe staff, is aware of what they've got and aware of the delicate nature of a piece. And then they, being aware of that, they're able to maintain and take care of it properly. It's sturdy. It certainly looks more fragile than it is, but it is a little bit fragile actually too.
The importance of being earnest. Love these sketches. I think Elizabeth Novak did these, a longtime ASF company member. So designers do a lot of research. They don't just sit down and start sketching. So they're connecting the research with character, with story. One thing Elizabeth noted in her description piece was that she shares that she wants the costumes to be a reflection of the characters. Tell us what she means by that.
Well, I think what she means by that is there's different ways to approach when you read a script and you read these characters that have been created by the playwright. Many times as a designer, you can help the actor find that character with the clothes that you give them. You can enforce that that thing that the actor might be searching for. I feel like in The Importance of Being Earnest, these characters are pretty laid out. Who they are, what they're about is there in the text. And so I feel like the playwright tells you who these people are, and the actor will interpret that in their way. But I feel like the designer can very much so interpret what the playwright's given them. And so I think that's what Elizabeth Novak means by that. It's like that it's pretty laid out there, and then you get, you know, that text really tells you who these folks are. So then the designer gets to show us who these folks are.
Another fun show we did recently was Into the Breaches, and that gorgeous red outfit that Celeste wears, it was so stunning when it walked on stage. So many of the people, and that was made custom for that actor.
Mm-hmm.
This was a period piece, and I know I get asked all the time, why don't you just buy vintage clothes and put those on? So tell us why we don't do that.
Well, I'll tell you why we don't do that. In many cases, there's lots of reasons, actually. Sometimes you can't find the right thing in the right size. And since there's only one of those out there and not a rack full, like if I went to a department store now, sometimes things that are vintage are too fragile. And they won't really hold up on stage for a long time because they've already been around a long time and they're just not in great shape. So we made this beautiful cranberry red suit for the Celeste character. It looks absolutely authentic. It looks absolutely vintage, aside from the fact that it also looks brand new, because it is. You might think if you looked inside, you would really be able to tell that it's brand new, because the insides of things get more worn than the outsides of things when you do find a vintage garment. And there were actually a few vintage pieces in the show. So that's another thing. When you do use vintage pieces, on the rare occasion that you can, but you also use new pieces that are made to look like a period piece, that's a real challenge to balance that so it all looks like it's from the same world. Because if I put a dress on somebody that's a dress that's 60 years old on one person, and next to them I put a dress that we made last week, but they all need to look like they're from the same world. That's quite a challenge, but it can be done successfully. You just have to be really creative and really smart with your choices.
Let's talk about A Christmas Carol. For many people, this is the first show they will see. It may be the only show they see in a year. For many people, it's a tradition. What type of pressure is there on a costume designer for a show of this large of scale and importance for people?
Right, it is important. A Christmas Carol is a story that most everybody's familiar with. There have been dozens of film and television versions of Dickens' story. There have been thousands of theatrical productions of it all over the world. And the productions at ASF has produced probably 8 different Christmas Carol scripts in its 35-year history here in Montgomery. And I would say that all of them have been pretty true to the original book, very classic. There are productions of Christmas Carol I've seen that are really unique and unusual, and ASS productions have been very traditional and classic. And I think there's certain characters, not unlike Mary Poppins, there's a certain expectation that audience has, certain things they expect to see and characters to be a certain way. And all the productions we've done at ASF have been, I would say, followed that sort of pattern. They've been very classic and very traditional. But we still, like, periodically will replace things. We'll make a new version of The Spirit of Christmas Yet to Come or The Spirit of Christmas Past, and they all the ones we've done at ASF have all fallen in a very classic traditional feel. But we have, we've brought new stuff to it quite frequently. So, but it is a challenge. And I think, again, it's one of those things, it's Christmas. You're coming to the show probably with your family, and you want to have an exciting experience, a fun holiday experience, and you probably don't want to be disappointed.
Jeffrey, you are such a wealth of knowledge and obvious passion. I'm curious, what is your favorite part of the costume making process?
Ooh, I really love my interaction with the costume designer. I like to get in their head, really understand what it is they're looking for, because the costume designers often are not with us the entire time we're working on their show. They'll often come in, get us started, they'll go away, they'll come back. So while they're not here, I kind of have to be their brain and their eye. So I really enjoy sort of getting to know them, getting to understand what they're looking for, and being that support person for them, and sort of being their liaison, and sort of standing in for them when they can't be here. And really just making sure that we take this thing, even though they're not here all the time, to the place they want it to land. And I really love getting to know them and getting to work with them in that way.
Well, you are a wealth of knowledge. It was so fun to watch you go through this curatorial process of picking these pieces out and revisiting them with our designers. Thank you for doing this. And thank you for many people opening up what it means to tell story through costumes. And it's a huge part of what we do. And you did a brilliant job with putting together Costume Parade. Thank you for all of your time and your skills. And thank you to the designers as well, who not only contributed their sketches, but also contributed behind the scenes thoughts and their insights into their work.
Yeah, all of our designers were so excited to be asked to participate in this exhibition. They were really beside themselves, especially during COVID. The fact that most of them have not been able to design a costume for a play in a year. The fact that they were in some way represented in something that was open and available for the public to see has been so exciting for them. And they have been really that just sort of been given sort of a breath of fresh air and a new life, I think, because they've been, all my costume designers have basically been shut down for a year. And so this really excited them. And they were also thrilled to be able to participate. And we were so thrilled to be able to share their work with our patrons, and now through this presentation as well.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back in the theater soon.